And good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending. I guess maybe some from out west are still in the forenoon, but it's going to be a fascinating talk today. I see a lot of guests who know Adam from other places. And Adam, if you could move to the next slide, that would help me introduce you because you have had an introduction. You had a PhD from Toronto in geography, but you've been doing research in climatology and environment in Canada for years, and you shared in the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize. That's wonderful to be able to put that on your CV. You've been working at Harvard University and you've represented Canada at many international climate negotiating sessions. You've written climate policy speeches for Canadian Environment Minister. We just lost a former one, as you know. She resigned from the cabinet. And you've authored Canadians' reports on climate change to the United Nations. You've edited 8 books on climate change, and they've certainly done an awful lot. And if you go to the next slide, you're going to go into that. Well, I'm going to just add one little thing here. You're presently the director of the University of Prince Edward Island's Climate Research Lab that has been sorted out. As you know, I have connections with Prince Edward Island and have watched it just get so far ahead in climate research and doing all sorts of wonderful things, and I'm so glad to see you in that position. But there's one interesting thing that was in your CV that I think people would be interested to know, that you maintain the largest fleet of drones at the university, including the largest drone in the country with a 4-meter wingspread. Well, with that, would you just, if I could take a moment to ask people again to send their questions through the chat. You don't have to pose the full question, but just indicate. I will be going through them and asking you to unmute and then say, but please, one question and keep them short, so we have lots of time for discussion. And I'll remind you of that again later. But let us fly off in his 4-meter wingspan to hear about climate change. Adam.
Well, thank you so much, Peter. And it really is an honor to talk to the Canadian Association of the Club of Rome. My mentor through the years, who really turned me into a scientist, was Dr. Tom Bridges, who was a chemist from University of Western. And he was sort of on the cusp between science and policy for the acid rain issue, initially with the government of Ontario and then with the federal government. And there were 2 things that he always talked ad nauseum about. One was the Club of Rome. So I'm really honored to be a part of this. The other was the Pugwash Conference. I was honored a few years ago. They had a 50th anniversary of the Pugwash, of course, here in Atlantic Canada and Pugwash, Nova Scotia, dealing with climate change. So I was able to present essentially what I'm going to be presenting to you today. So climate change, we're screwed. It's our fault. It's going to get worse and there's nothing we can do about it. Well, now that's a title, isn't it? Well, I'd like to take claim for it, but it's I was teaching in Germany about 5 years ago, and after I gave a talk similar to the one from today, one of the students came up to me, and she was a bit more profane. She said, basically, you're saying we're fucked. It's our fault. It's going to get worse, and there's nothing we can do about it. And I thought a bit for a while, and I said, yeah, you're absolutely right. And so when people have invited me to give talks and they're looking for something that captures people's attention, this is what I pull out of the closet. I don't really like the last bit. There's nothing we can do about it. This is what climate deniers have been jumping on recently. You know, initially the climate deniers said, you know, the Earth is not warming up. And then when there was irrefutable evidence, they said, okay, yeah, it's warming up, but it's not our fault. And, you know, it's not humans. And then when there was irrefutable evidence of that now, it's like, okay, it's warming, it's our fault, but, you know, there's nothing we can really do about it. So it's more for effect. I will show there probably are some things we can do about it. You know, we definitely need to do something, certainly over the decades to come. So first of all, we're screwed. Well, what we're looking at here are the top 10 warmest years in recorded history. And you can see that the last 6 of them were the last 6 years. We really entered this new phase of warming. You can see that of the warmest years globally on record, this comes from the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and they look at over 24,000 records. They also look at satellite imagery as well, satellite measurements. And you can see that obviously we're in this warming period. And it's not because we're in a particularly warm solar cycle. We do have a 14-year solar cycle. But we've been receiving the warmest years in recorded history during times when we're receiving the least amount of solar radiation that warms the Earth coming from our sun. We are actually swinging around now, and we're starting to move up that curve towards warmer or more solar radiation coming in. So not only are we experiencing the warmest temperatures on Earth, but we're probably going to get a lot warmer over the next few years, just simply because of that increase in the incoming solar radiation. It can affect us as much as, you know, half a degree. What does this warmer world mean to us? Well, for those of you on the West Coast, I don't have to say very much, although it's quite warm here in Prince Edward Island. I was going to open the window, but if I open the window, it's actually warmer outside than it is inside. But these are, this was something that just appeared in the New York Times 2 days ago, looking at Portland, Oregon, and that mass that you're seeing from left to right from January to December are the daily maximum temperatures from 1979 to 2021. So that's considered to be what we call a climate normal period. We like to have 30 years of daily observation. That's about 10,978, let's say, of daily observations. Well, those little red dots is what you're seeing are the last 3 days that have happened in Portland. In fact, it's even gone up from that. So you can see that it's entirely anomalous. It's unprecedented, probably in our recorded history. Definitely over the last 30 years or our climate normal period, you can see that it is that we are experiencing some very, very unusual things out there in the environment. That's on top of early drought. You know, we came out of a winter. This is what you're looking at here are the west coast of the United States from the year, and looking at drought. The extreme drought are the darker colors, and going to abnormally dry being the lighter colors, and starting at the bottom, going 2000. Reading right to left until we reach 2021, and you can see that it's the worst drought conditions in June that they've had certainly over the last couple of decades. What else does this warmer temperatures on the Earth give us? Well, it certainly gives us a lot more and stronger hurricanes. Let's call it not so much more, but stronger hurricanes. From 2016 to 2019, we had at least one Category 5 hurricane in the Atlantic region. You know, if you look through the years there, Category 5 is on the scale that you see in the lower right-hand corner. There's even been talks of, you know, perhaps we're going to need to have additional categories for hurricanes. You can see at the list that I've put there the number of deaths and the economic damage as well. There seems to be that there's a lot of attention because, you know, just a couple of years ago, we had 2 Category 5 storms actually reach the coast of the United States of America and causing deaths, sometimes over 100 deaths. And that's where it seems to grab a lot of attention. You know, Dorian, which was only a couple of years ago, Hurricane Dorian, we still don't know how many people actually died from that because most of the deaths occurred in the Bahamas and they haven't been able to confirm. They're still listed as missing 245 people. But you can see that that's Dorian, image of Dorian in the lower left-hand corner. And in the upper left-hand corner, you can see the Atlantic Category 5 hurricanes, looking at things every decade since the 1920s. And certainly in this century, we've been experiencing certainly significantly more Category 5 hurricanes, which are causing more deaths and causing more damage. The heat also is affecting forest fires. You know, every year we hear about, every winter we hear about the Australian ones, and every summer we hear about the California wildfires. In fact, last year was, in 2020, was the largest wildfire season in California. 4% of their overall land, forested land, burned during that forest fire. So you can imagine the accumulated damage year after year after year if we're reaching points where 4% of the entire forested land of California are burning. The California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection talks about the intensity of these fires increasing as a result of climate change. Tornadoes is another thing. Just a few days ago, a tornado ripped through southern Czech Republic, killing 3 people. Never seen tornadoes before. You know, these are some of the weird and unusual things that are going on, and climatologists like myself are getting a little worried. You know, what's happening? It certainly is. It's not the only example of that. There's been some increase in the frequency of tornadoes. We're not really sure yet. You know, certainly our global climate models don't allow us to get to that micro level to suggest that tornado activity will increase and where it will increase. But certainly, you know, the logic behind it is the dynamics of the system with more energy in it would lead to more tornado activity. Sea level rise. Wow, that's something we know about here on Prince Edward Island. You know, the oceans have been taking up a lot more energy than we anticipated. A lot more of the heating, and as they heat up, it takes up more space. And there have been papers over the last 5-6 years talking about the increase in the melting of the Greenland ice sheet and how that is contributing to the sea level rise. And even down in Antarctica, a chunk of ice, almost the size of Prince Edward Island, broke off in July of 2017, not only displacing water, but also then starts to melt faster, contributing to our sea level rise. So all of these peer-reviewed publications that have been coming out over the last 6 or 7 years led to this report on the left-hand side. And again, we've got the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, the U.S. Geological Survey, the Department of Commerce, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, among others. So they've suggested that that these new scientific studies are providing evidence support a physically plausible global mean sea level rise in the range of 2 to 2.7 meters. That means Prince Edward Island is 3 islands. That means half of Florida is underwater, and that's what we're talking about is 90 years from now. So certainly not in our lifetimes, but certainly in some of our children's or grandchildren's lifetimes that these activities might be occurring. It's not so much even that future, because certainly the flooding is having effects. Some of you were discussing on the line here before we started about how that collapse of the condominium in Miami Beach is being attributed to the flooding of the parking garage basements, leading to deterioration of the rebar and the cement, contributing to that collapse. And if you've been to Miami, every time I've been down to Miami in the last decade, there's always streets you can't go down because they've been impacted by flooding. They're just so low-lying there in Florida. They've created a lot of canals. So depending on how fast this happens, there might be some huge disruption that's going to occur down in Florida for sure. They have a geology there that it's not easy to just put up a big seawall like we do up here in the north. Seawalls, they don't last forever anyway. They usually just deflect the energy, so you're usually eroding someplace. It's just not the thing you want to protect. But in Florida, it's just the geology that the water seeps in underneath that they've got to come up with something more ingenious than just putting up a big seawall for its protection. Now, this is getting a bit dated now. I don't know if any of you remember this book. It's called 6 Degrees, Our Future on a Hotter Planet. It was winner of the 2008 Royal Society Science Book Prize. That's the Royal Society of the United Kingdom. But Linus looked at all of the scientific literature to get a handle on, well, what would these increases in global average temperatures actually mean? For 1 degree, we're talking about fresh water loss from 1/3 of the world's surface, low-lying coastlines flooded. That's things that we're starting to experience now. Scientists have documented that in the 20th century, the global increase in average temperature was 0.8 degrees Celsius. So that's relatively close to that. A 2 degree increase. What do we know about 2 degrees? Well, if you remember back in 1992, when 192 countries signed on to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, these countries were agreeing that they were going to try and prevent dangerous climate change. Not really sure, knowing what that was. Well, that UN Framework Convention group assigned it to to answer that question. What does dangerous climate change mean? Assigned that to a scientific committee, and they came up with anything above 2 degrees. Since the Industrial Revolution, 2 degrees Celsius of a global average increase in temperature. So that would probably mean here for Canada like a 4 degree change since that 1820 to 1840 time period. Because usually the global, Canada usually the national average for Canada is about double of what the global average is, and it's even more so up in the north. Things are warming much faster up into the far north. But if we are, and this is what the Paris Agreement is trying to help resolve, is this, try and keep us below 2 degrees Celsius or 1.5 degrees Celsius. At 2 degrees Celsius, Linus was looking at Europeans dying of heat stroke, forests ravaged by fire. We're already seeing some of that. Stress plants beginning to emit carbon rather than absorbing it. A third of all species on the Earth facing extinction. That's pretty significant change, and that's probably quite realistic for where we're headed, as we'll soon find out. And then it just keeps getting worse and worse. Even though I'm smiling, I try to be optimistic about these things. The 3-degree increase leads to death of the Amazon rainforest. 4-degree increase of global temperature. Global warming becomes unstoppable because of the permafrost thawing and releasing methane. Britain made uninhabitable. The Mediterranean region abandoned because it's too warm. 5 degrees Celsius, the humans migrate in search of food. 6 degrees, life on Earth ends with apocalyptic storms, flash floods, hydrogen sulfide gas, and methane fireballs racing across the globe with the power of atomic bombs. Only fungi survive. Wow. So I think it'd be really worthwhile to update that book. It's been a few years. It's been a decade. But this gives us a sense of how, we're given the path that we're on, we're kind of screwed. And it's our fault. What we're looking at here, the present time period is on our right-hand side of the graph. And then it goes back in time, years before the present, going back 800,000 years. And we're able to come up with these carbon dioxide, atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide, measured in parts per million through ice cores. We're able to dig these kilometer-long ice cores that they pull out and measure the carbon dioxide in each of the layers that get laid down year to year. But you can see that, you can see from here that that the atmospheric concentrations of CO2 are the highest there's been in 800,000 years. But we can even say that they weren't this high for 3 million years. A temperature then was, fortunately, I can't read what it says there. Well, you probably can. What does it say? 2 to 3, it looks like to me, but, and sea level was certainly much higher than it is today. And so why is it our fault? Well, if we look at the just pre-industrial times to today, so if we're reading this graph the other way, we're going left to right, looking at 1800 coming up to 2019 as the last year on our data here. Now, what we're looking at here are the carbon dioxide emissions from the burning of fossil fuels for energy and cement production. Land use changes not included, but I just wanted to show you that really since 1950, we've just had this huge exponential growth in the release of carbon dioxide emissions. So it's so even though we've known about the science behind the burning of fossil fuels and the release of CO2 emissions and that them accumulating in the atmosphere, we've known about that for 140 years. It's only in the last 50 to 70 years that it's really been happening at a pace that's having the impact that we have. How do we know that our releases are humans' fault and maybe not volcanoes' fault, or the oceans are releasing these things? Well, this is one of the things I like to call an anthropogenic fingerprint. Really what we're talking about is that we can tell the carbon molecule has a certain isotope if it's from burning of fossil fuels or if it's something that's released from plants. And so it's these carbon isotope ratios that allow us to see that that growth in the atmospheric concentration is coming from our burning of fossil fuels and not from other sources. So we're screwed. It's our fault. And now it's going to get worse. These are some of those greenhouse gases: carbon dioxide, CO2, methane, CH4, nitrous oxide, NTO, hydrochlorofluorocarbons. We still had a lot of chlorofluorocarbons still in the atmosphere. We're trying to wash those out. So there's a lot of these gases that that we produce through human activity, the fossil fuel combustion, landfills, driving our cars, manufacturing, fertilizing our food, substitutions for chlorofluorocarbons, we're depleting the ozone layer. So it's affecting all of, basically all of the human activity that we engage ourselves in really contributes to these atmospheric greenhouse gases. I put a couple of graphs in here because it just helps us think about things a little better. This is not up to date, but I like it very much because it shows, where are the greenhouse gases coming from in terms of the sector on the left-hand side. So you can see that, 13.5% of transportation sector produces of the globe's greenhouse gases. That's where they come from. Electricity and heat, about 25%. Land use change, about just over 18%. Agriculture, 13.5%. Like I said, these are probably not up to date, but I like the way this demonstrates things because you can start targeting in on things. Like if you look at the end use activity, if you're really interested in air travel, it's showing that it represents about 1.6% of the overall greenhouse gases that humans are contributing to the atmosphere. And the last part of the graph shows, who are the guilty gases. You see carbon dioxide is still one of the largest contributors, 77%. And you can see methane and nitrous oxide and how little those hydrofluorocarbons actually contribute in terms of a percentage, but their global warming potential are very high. So that means just little bits of them really end up trapping in the greenhouse gases. But if we want to start looking at, well, what do we target? These are some of the areas. If we wanted to look at targeting, okay, well, where do we target? Which country? This is actually a map of the world. And it's a map of the world that shows each country's contribution to an annual carbon dioxide emission. Actually, it's not. It's greenhouse gases, but it's normalized carbon dioxide emissions. And so you can see up in the left-hand corner, Canada, US, Mexico, then it goes down to the Caribbean and Central and South America. Across from that is Africa. So Africa, large in geographic size and large in human population, but not so large in terms of its greenhouse gas emissions. Then there's Europe and Russia, and then of course a big China, and the Middle East sort of is a big anomaly. But I like this graph too because it gives you an idea of where Canada stands in relation to other countries. You can point to Australia as a bit smaller. You can point to South Korea as being just a tad smaller. Japan is more, Russia's more. The UK is just a tad smaller too. So it gives you a sense of in relation to each other. But it does raise an issue as well because you look at a graph like this and you say, well, what about China? Why don't we, they're the big emitters. But I have a real problem with that, primarily because, if I pick up my cell phone or if I put on my glasses, or I'm wearing these headphones, or if I look at my watch and I look at my shirt, it's more than likely all of these were made in China. And I'm actually using, I mean, I've created the demand for it, but all of the greenhouse gases that went into providing me with this shirt and my glasses and my headphones and my watch and my iPhone, China has to take responsibility for. I'm not sure that that's necessarily fair, especially when you start looking at the per capita emissions. Well, let's just focus on the right-hand side here for per capita emissions. And you can see where the world average is. Again, this is not up to date, but it gives you some general feeling about it. You can see that China is just below the world average, but places like Canada and the US and Australia are just real hogs when it comes to the per capita greenhouse gas emissions. These are things that we need to challenge, we need to reconcile, we need to make some sense of, especially given, like I said, that I get to benefit from, because those don't count. Those don't count for the emissions that went into this shirt or these headphones or this glasses. Those belong to China because that's where they were manufactured. So why it's why, you know, where did we go? We went for we're screwed. It's our fault. It's going to get worse. Okay, this is a reason why I think it's going to get worse, and I start to lose hope. And this comes from that esteemed scientific magazine known as Rolling Stone. Many of you are probably familiar with Bill McKibben, who's a really great writer, and I'd recommend if you get a chance, he's able to put things into really understandable language. But one of the things that he came out with almost a decade ago now is 3 numbers you need to know. And this is what makes life so difficult. The first one, I'm just going to go through these and we'll examine them a little bit closer. First of all, temperature. We need to limit human increase in global average temperature to 2 degrees Celsius from the pre-industrial times. That's what we've called dangerous climate change. The second are 565 gigatons. So that's 1 billion metric tons of CO2 equivalent. So what is 1 ton of CO2 equivalent? Well, that's what it looks like in that little image below. So if you can think of 565 more billion of these, that's what we can release into the atmosphere to stay below that 2 degrees Celsius, or we'll have a 4 in 5 chance of doing that. So it's a little bit of Russian roulette in a way, but you know, it makes our odds are in our favor that we can keep things below 2 degrees Celsius. Now, the problem is that at this moment, well, back in 2012, there were already about 5 times that amount that we can burn to stay below. So 5 times more that we've already identified in the proven coal and oil and gas reserves. These are those that, you know, fossil fuels that humans are planning to burn. And they're also that are in the books of, you know, the valuation of these oil and gas companies. You know, if you look at the top 10 corporations, I guess you've got those crazy ones now, like Tesla and Amazon and Apple. But certainly 6 out of the 10 are sort of, you know, oil and gas or automobile. So they're there for a reason. So let's look at each of those. Well, this 2 degree temperature. So as I mentioned before, we've already, you know, scientists have already confirmed that during the 20th century, we've increased our global average temperatures at 0.8 degrees Celsius. Well, we already are committed to another 0.8 degrees Celsius, just with all of the greenhouse gases that we've emitted into the atmosphere. They have long lifespans in the atmosphere, so they're just going to stick around. So we're already sort of at 1.6 degrees Celsius increase. So we're really close to that 2 degrees Celsius threshold that we're trying to prevent dangerous climate change. A lot of people think that 2 degrees is too much, right? Kerry Emanuel from MIT says any number much above 1 degree involves a gamble. Thomas Lovejoy, he's the one who coined the phrase biodiversity. He said if what we're seeing today is at 0.8 degrees Celsius, 2 degrees is simply too much. Jim Hansen, he's probably the most famous climatologist in the world, recently retired. He was with NASA. He said the target that's been talked about in international negotiations for 2 degrees of warming is actually a prescription for long-term disaster. So what we're saying is that, my point is that, we're aiming for 2 degrees, but there's a lot of evidence that says at 2 degrees, we're still in huge damage in the Earth's environment. Well, if we're, if we want to limit ourselves to that 2 degrees, we can only release 560 gigatons of the CO2 equivalent. So we expect that we'll reach that by 2028. It's not far from now. That's why we did have world leaders saying we have to act now and really meaning it. And they were saying things like, if we don't do something within the next few years, because there's so much inertia of our economies and all of our activities that it's going to be very difficult to sort of just slam things down. That 5 times of the gigatons of carbon. What concerns me the most is that they're assets of companies right now, and they're assets of companies that you and I, it's part of our retirement fund, right? It's part of wherever we have our pensions are investing in these companies. Not always, but most cases. Oil and gas wasn't doing very good returns recently, so they moved away from them. But I think they're back on it. I'm the type of person, I've made a great career. I've been in this business of climate change for 33 years now. When I retire, I'm happy to take 1/3 of a cut in my pension to help save the planet. I just don't think there are that many other people who would, right? Because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about writing off, not going out and pulling out of the ground these fossil fuels and burning them. That's essentially what's at stake. Let me put it more simply. I'm a big guy, 220 pounds. I can drink 6 beers in a night every hour, not get drunk. Still drive home within the legal limit. The oil and gas companies are opening 36 beers in front of me and saying, go ahead and drink up, and then try to drive that car home. It's a real challenge. Well, really, there's nothing we can do about it, because that to me is pretty insurmountable. I can't see us being able to get countries to commit to, and businesses, to large corporations, to write off those assets of their companies. So we've turned to hope. We're getting pretty desperate, and there's something called geoengineering options. With the last few minutes that I have, I'm going to quickly go through them. One of them is, sometimes, every once in a while, volcanoes, not all of them, but some of them, will put ash very high up into the atmosphere, and it deflects the incoming solar radiation. And so it cools the planet. And this happened back in '93 with Pinatubo in Indonesia. That's this one here. The summer of '93. You can see it on every climate record when you're going through that. All of a sudden, there's this very cold period in 1993. There have been some experiments as well by Yuri Israel. He was with the first assessment of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that I was a part of. And he was from Georgia, and when he retired, he went and did this experiment in Tbilisi by releasing particulate matter out into the atmosphere. And sure enough, it cooled the localized environment. Not a good thing to do to your people, though, because a lot of this particulate matter gets into your lungs. So people who have asthma and that, it can really be harmful to them. Another thing is seeding the oceans with iron. There've been, I remember this German scientist who said, give me 2 ships of iron, I'll give you the next ice age. Well, this is not him, but this is an American businessman, Russ George, and he worked with the Haida Gwaii First Nations Reserve, promising to help bring back the salmon by dumping iron into the ocean, increasing plankton blooms, which would suck in the carbon for their growth. The salmon would eat that, and then when they went for the Haida Gwaii to have, so they had this experiment, quite a big one. You can see from the satellite imagery this bloom that occurred, and Russ George was arrested by the RCMP. They confiscated everything he had. I think his data is now available from that experiment. The Haida Gwaii do say that the salmon had a good return run, but the Russ was hoping to take advantage of the open carbon market at the time. At the time, the Chicago Stock Exchange had a carbon market. I think it was about $12 per ton, per metric ton. And so he was going to take advantage by doing the experiments and showing how much was sequestered by that. So that's one, all of these have their problems, you can imagine. Another thing too is these mirrors in the sky. There's a place up in space that that's the common gravity between the Earth and the sun, so you can just put it up there and it stays up there. Well, there's been suggestion that you put these mirrors in the sky to reflect the incoming solar radiation, so it won't impact as strongly. Very expensive, as you can imagine. All of these things were theoretically possible, and looking at seriously, the U.S. National Academy of Sciences is releasing reports constantly on these geoengineering options, but they really seem to me like, like the diet pill, right? We don't want to eat well, we don't want to exercise, we just want to take a pill and everything will go away. Everything will go away. I'm not sure these geoengineering options will work. Do we really need to just fine tune everything? That's what I find. So many meetings that I go to and discussions that we have, it just seems to be like a very marginal change of what's going on, where what we really need to do is we need a real fundamental change for the way that humans behave and interact with the natural environment. And that's what I'm calling for, is really a paradigm shift in our relationship with the natural environment. Because if we had a magic wand and got rid of the climate change issue tomorrow, there's a long line of other environmental issues that are going to threaten us from a global perspective. Things like biodiversity, water scarcity. There's so many. I don't think that this fine tuning is going to help us. It's I don't say that we should stop, but I think there's something more fundamental that's required. And really, you really have to turn to First Nations, are the only is the immediate place to go for the knowledge of building a relationship with a natural environment that's certainly sustainable. All right, thank you so much. Only 1 minute over in time, so I hope that's okay, because I'm looking forward to the questions.
Well, thanks ever so much, Adam, for that review of why we're screwed and what possibly could be done about it. We're going to hope that we have, there are questions already in the chat, and I will be asking people to put their questions into the chat, and I will go through them as they have come in. But as chair, I will take the purview for the first question, if I may. As you know, it was some 40 years ago that I left the University of Toronto to take on the presidency of UPI because of all the intriguing things they were doing then to try to solve world problems. And I guess you've done a little bit of the same thing in the sense of and I like if you could share what you see for the potential of the island and for UPI and the Climate Research Lab to help answer some of these questions.
Well, thank you so much for giving me a platform for that one. That's really great. Well, I don't know if many of you know, but it was briefly mentioned that my career was almost 25 years with Environment Canada in the research side of things, kind of straddling research and science policy was sort of my business. I made a real career at trying to link global climate models to local decision making. And at the time I had 2 research labs at the University of Toronto, one in the downtown campus, one out in Scarborough. And so we were trying to, well, and we made some efforts and some inroads in helping communities understand, well, what the heck does this climate change thing mean to me? And what I had learned is that they were so responsive to 2 things. One is local, like, understanding local knowledge. Like if you say, we're going to hurt the polar bears, like that's a nice charismatic fauna, as they call it. But people were kind of like, who cares about the polar bears, really? I care about my life. So if you can make it local about the things they were interested in, and 2, if you could be quantitative. Because a lot of people were waving their hands at the time saying climate change is bad, it's going to do this, it's going to do that. But until you have an idea of by how much, because, Peter could say to me, Adam, we're going to reduce your salary next year. And, if he says it's $2, I'm not going to scream that much. If he says we're going to cut it in half, then there's a really big problem. And initially, when I started these types of studies with communities across Southern Ontario, I really didn't expect there to be that much of a change anticipated in the things that were important to them. But lo and behold, that's what's great about science, is there's surprises. And these surprises were emerging, right? The number of snow days might decrease so significantly, it's going to help your municipal budget in 30 years, that kind of thing. Well, about 10 years ago, I was asked to come to Prince Edward Island, and I was just offered a job. It's never happened to me before, where they just say, here, you want to come and, start a climate lab or something like that, is what they said. So I said, sure. So initially I just said, well, I'm here to do anything and everything to do with climate. But as we really learned that Prince Edward Island in southern Canada is really at the forefront of climate change impacts. We are seeing some very significant increases in temperature and decreases in precipitation that are truly influencing the 3 main industries of the island. And most islands, it's agriculture, fisheries, and tourism. Tourism in a very good sense, right? People want to come to the island when it's warm and it's dry. And we've got that in spades now, folks. And it's, thank goodness, because of the ocean breezes, and we're really flat, because, you can at least cool down. We don't have that craziness that you folks in the West Coast are dealing with right now. The PEI as well at the forefront is that the island itself is sinking a little bit, not very much. The sea levels are rising. We're basically just a sandbar. We're made up of sand and sandstone, so it's easily erodable. And the communities here have dealt with erosion in their histories. But things are really getting out of control. We're finding places with like 5 meters of erosion during 1 year. It's usually one storm, big storm in the winter, boom, wipes out, if you can imagine, 5 meters of your property, you start getting scared. So a lot of our infrastructure, we've got about 1,000 homes that are vulnerable, homes and cottages are vulnerable to coastal erosion. 17 lighthouses, over 40 square kilometers of roads, and the island's shrinking. There's, we've been able to quantify that. So what Prince Edward Island really does is it's large enough to matter, but it's small enough so that you can be very completist. You can be comprehensive in your studies. I've looked at every single meter of PEI's coastline, and that's what we measure every 10 years. In between, we look at 100 different places. We take our drones out and fly around to measure certain runs of beaches that are particularly vulnerable.
Yeah. Adam, we have quite a number of questions. I wonder if we could move on to some other questioners.
Sure. So it's very good to have this, my mindset is that it's easy to conceptualize here in PEI, and then we can upscale. People talk about downscaling all the time. We can really easily upscale to share this expertise across the country and around the world. And we've exported to places like City of Los Angeles some of our technology.
Okay, thank you. Now, Raymond and Anitra had comments at the very beginning. Are they questions, or do we move on to Julia?
Well, let's move on to Julia or Anitra. Go ahead.
I'm happy to ask it as a question. A lot of places have roads sinking into the sea, and a lot of places have strong erosion. Are these temporary measures that governments are taking throughout the planet actually going to be worthwhile in your estimation, or should something really fundamental be done about the coastline? In other words, evacuate so much of the coastline. I mean, because what we're doing now is putting a lot of band-aids on the problem, and at enormous expense. So do you have a macro kind of solution for the living?
It's a great question. I think you're right. Yeah, and to be blunt, yeah, we're wasting our money. The sea wins, eventually. That's what I'm quoted as saying. Get in trouble with my engineering friends because they think they can solve the world. But everything that we do is so temporary. We try to protect things. Like the province of PEI does not recommend protection, like armoring protection, for two reasons. One, it's really expensive. We don't have any hard stone here. We got to import it. You have to engineer it. And the second reason is it doesn't work. Sure, it works in the short term, but you got to replace it. And really, can we afford to be putting up seawalls every 12 years that cost $4 million? I know it doesn't sound a lot to you folks, PEI, that's a lot of cash. So, my recommendation is don't build so darn close to the shore. It's that simple. We all are seduced by the coastline. We all want to live right on the edge, but it's pretty obvious what you shouldn't do. And you know what? People come and ask me, and they say, should I build here? And I say, no. And they say, why not? And I said, 6 years, you're going to have a problem. And they go ahead and they build. I think we have too much darn money, to tell you the truth. People just don't seem to care. And yes, we do have to evacuate certain areas. Yes, we have to tell people not to build in certain areas. And I'm of the belief that, sometimes government's got to tell people to stop doing the wrong thing, and that's definitely needs to be done strongly, because you can't. I've had even climatologists who built in places that are going to disappear in the next 20 years, like down in the United States, and they say, well, I don't have any children and what have you, but that's social capital that's lost, right? That's not just the money that we only hold and it gets passed around. If you build a home and it falls in the ocean, it creates damage in the ocean. People should be responsible for that. So yeah, we're wasting our money. We got to have a bigger plan. I don't think we're going to change our lives and stop this rise in sea level. So let's admit it and learn how to live with it and start moving things, moving infrastructure or abandoning infrastructure.
Thank you. Julia?
Thanks for a great talk, Adam. My question builds on what you said about governments need to start taking a stronger role. And do you think there is a time now where governments need to actually impose drastic hardline measures like rationing cars, fuel, imposing more plant-based diets, reducing meat production, all these things? And when I say this to my brother, he says that sounds like a climate dictatorship, which is a little scary. But I come from a public health background, and I remember the day when people didn't think that smoking in public was a problem. And the behavior change started to happen once it became a policy of not being able to smoke in public. Similarly, the seatbelt laws, we had lots of data on seatbelts being protective. Nobody really changed behavior until you got a ticket for driving along without that. So I'm quite in favor of starting to impose these things if we can't voluntarily change our behavior, but I'd be curious to hear what you think.
Let's not call it climate dictatorship. Let's call it climate socialism. I'm okay with that one. Yeah, it is. You know, our humans are really strange beings, and how we don't, we tend to move away from doing the right thing sometimes for unusual purposes. I think with the smoking, it really was influenced by the court case challenges, and when they became financially responsible. And some of that is happening right now. We do have organizations, we have youth taking governments to court, suing them because of for the damage that they're doing to the environment. In Canada, we've had a few setbacks. I think some of them haven't been able to advance, or they've been losing in the lower courts, but maybe that'll continue. And it's, we almost, we all find it difficult to think that government knows what's good for us and what we should be doing, right? Like, we all have trouble with that. I do, and I think most people do. But I think sometimes we do need that type of protection, right? And it astounds me why, well, of the economic forces and other politics that get engaged. What astounds me that we allow it as individuals for certain things to happen, with all of the negative health effects from high sugar drinks, that we would actually still allow those in school or anywhere else, is just astounding. Like, it just astounds me. So I would really support you that we need to do it. I want to call it climate socialism, though. Perhaps that'll be a bit better.
Okay, thank you, Raymond. You going back to you with your comments, your question, and Kari is next.
So my question really was on, what if we do nothing? So we need to do something to at least avoid the very worst outcomes. And related to that is that we've talked a bit about mitigation and how expensive it is. Mitigation will comfort the people doing mitigation directly because it'll protect their coastline or whatever it may be. However, if we're doing the adaptation, will protect people who are spending the money on it, but the mitigation protects the whole planet. So it's hard to see the link between, spending money on reducing carbon emissions and the climate of the whole planet, right? So how do you see that? And how do you think that's going to work out?
So what was the last bit? You cut it. How do I?
So what I'm asking is how do you see that, the fact that there's a lot of money needed to spend on adaptation, but mitigation is really what will put out the fire, if you will, right? So how do you see that playing out, and how do you see us in Canada handling that?
Playing out? Well, even if okay, so it's this balance between mitigation and adaptation, right? So mitigation, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Adaptation means, hey folks, we got to live with it. So what do we do about it? And how do we change, our systems, our social systems, our economic systems, knowing that these changes from climate change are happening? I don't have faith in the mitigation side of things. Maybe others do, and please get on the line and lecture me about it. I was there at the Paris talks, and the Canadian delegation didn't say any. I was there as a university person. The delegation didn't talk to me at all, except for the very last day. I got this message that said, "Would you support us signing on to this agreement or not?" Which was the idea of let's have the aspirational goal of having 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in temperature from pre-industrial times. I said no, because we can't physically do that as a scientist, right? 0.8 degrees Celsius from last century, plus our greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere, 0.8 degrees Celsius. We're not going to be able to make it. So, many other colleagues jumped on top of me, saying that, it's just an aspirational goal. We got to do this. This is just one step of many steps. But I'll tell you, the step isn't far enough. If you look at countries' commitments to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and each country gets their own to design their own commitments. When you add all those up, we're not close to it, and those are only the commitments. We all know how well we did with our previous commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We didn't. We couldn't even make 6% reduction last time we tried as part of the Kyoto Protocol. Do we really think we're going to be making? Is there any evidence that somebody can present that we're going to change things? There are some things that happen in society very quickly. This movement towards electric vehicles, I think, is going to be very swift. I think I think if we're talking 6 years from now, virtually everybody's going to have an electric vehicle if you're going to purchase a new car. That's fast, and that's a good step, but it's not big enough, and there's lots more big ones that need to happen. It eats at the fundamental basis of, like I said, our relationship to the natural environment. And if it's not going to be climate, it's going to be something else. To come to your question, that means, because I don't have faith in mitigation, we've got to do a lot of adaptation, and that may mean money, or that may mean just recognizing that we're going to that the climate's changing in such ways that we're going to start to manage that risk. And I think business is starting to move that way. Insurance industries have over the last couple of decades, but we're certainly, and businesses are really, just through their own winning and losing. The market, climate plays that invisible hand, climate affects that invisible hand of Adam Smith. So, I definitely think we're going to be doing a lot more adaptation. It's just whether or not maybe we won't even call it adaptation. And certainly governments need a plan. The federal government of Canada doesn't have a plan yet. They've been promising, and hopefully they'll have something before the end of this summer.
We have a lot of questions coming up. If I could ask people to keep them short and move on to Carrie, and after that, Martin.
Thank you, Peter, and thanks for your presentation, Adam. My name is Carrie Munvan. I'm a Senior Policy Analyst with the national organization Citizens for Public Justice. And my question actually is therefore more of a policy question, builds on what Julia asked earlier in terms of really, how do we get to systems change? I just recently had the privilege of reading Seth Klein's book, A Good War, Mobilizing Canada for the Climate Emergency. And I wondered, one, if you're familiar with what he's proposed, and two, what you think of it. And namely, he says we need an emergency mindset, and we need to spend accordingly, much like we did at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. We need mandatory measures, not just incentives. And we really need to completely reorient the economy just the same way we did, or similar as to what we did during the Second World War. So I'm just curious as to, in terms of there's nothing we can do about it, might this be time for sort of an emergency mindset that really takes it away from our own individual choices and puts it in the hands of government a bit more.
Agreed. I agree with your support for those. I presume you support those 3 initiatives. And yeah, I agree that those are needed and needed now. So whether
You'll be
I have,
happier if you keep those separate when you take them. Holy shit.
sorry?
Oh,
I think
I
maybe
was-
the next questioner is unmuted prematurely.
Oh,
No,
okay.
I muted, that was Zach. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so, you know, and there's others. There's Jeremy Rifkin has something called the 4th Industrial Revolution that I think is called, or third Industrial Revolution. And there's certain things in there that make a lot of sense. One of them being one of them is calls an energy internet, which is a weird term for it, but just the idea that each building should be responsible for its own energy requirements through renewables, through geothermal, wind, or solar, and that be able to connect to close buildings and share that energy as required. So there's no central organization. I mean, it's so hard to change these systems. You know, we have this down where I live, something called Maritime Electric, which provides us with our main electricity. It's a very vulnerable system, these large systems, because they go down all the time with big storms. And when we talk about supporting them, we never talk about, about maybe moving away from this large centralized system to a decentralized system where, like I said, every building is responsible for its own. Similarly with manufacturing, there's a lot of greenhouse gas emissions that happen as a result of shipping raw materials and finished goods around the world, where Rifkin suggests that because of our advances in 3D printing technology, that we could just have a printing manufacturing house in every town that would be able to produce whatever, but all our needs were for goods.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I think the next one is Martin. Do you want to go ahead?
Yes, Adam, thanks for your presentation. A question.
Zach is next. Yeah.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, question about change. We didn't see the COVID pandemic coming. Does the global response to this pandemic offer any positive hopes with regard to climate change and the needed actions? I would argue it does, but I'd like to hear your views.
I agree too. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it, but yeah, I should be optimistic because of the way that countries were able to come together. And part of that was because I saw how poorly other countries were dealing with situations. Our largest, my belief, and I think the science is out there, that the largest concerns with climate are going to be in terms of food scarcity, food security, water scarcity initially, and that leading to huge migrations of people. We've been able to, in Canada, we took in 30,000 Syrian refugees in 1 year, quite handily, and very proud of that. But what do we do when it's not 30,000, it's 300,000, 3 million, 30 million, or more, like what do we do? So it has a chance, in the immediate shorter term, perhaps, it's something we can manage. If we do have these climate catastrophes on the scale of COVID, my belief is that they're going to be larger, right, eventually. So maybe we can learn from that as we go.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And next is Zach, and after that, Ted Manning.
well, thank you very much for your talk. Quite enjoyed it, but my quick question, which I will ignore, was what exactly did Russ George do that got him arrested? More likely, I'm about to say, and I'm I'm going to agree with Carrie that we are kind of in desperate times, or about to be, and desperate times are going to call for desperate measures. Okay, geoengineering isn't going to work. Okay, ocean fertilization isn't going to work. Okay, there's 420 parts per million, last I looked, in the of carbon dioxide or equivalent in the atmosphere. It doesn't go away in the kinds of time that I think we need to avoid humanity facing a 3, 4, 5, God help us, not a 6 degrees Celsius global warming. What do you suggest?
Suggest we pray.
Oh, thanks. That's, what
Oy
a
vey,
strategy.
oy vey,
What
right?
a strategy.
Well, the way you put it, yeah.
You're too late. I'm already doing that.
You've already done that. Yeah, I've been doing that for 33 years too. What do we do? You know, I keep doing what I'm doing, which is at least presenting this doomsday scenario to my students in such a way that they can have hope. And that's where I see the hope. If there's anywhere, I don't see any hope in us old folks like us who are set in our ways and spoiled to the teeth in terms of our lifestyle. But there's a significant amount of younger individuals that I come across who are willing to forego what we've come to take for granted in terms of expediency of transportation systems, in terms of fashion design, in terms of everything that's, you know, that led us to the stage that we're at right now. What's it going to be if I had to put on my magic goggles looking into the future? I think it's going to be one of the geoengineering is just through crisis mode that we're going to be forced to do something, you know, like pumping particulate matter into the upper atmosphere is a relatively, out of all of those three that I suggested, probably has the least amount of overall what do you call it, collateral damage. The question would be, who's got their pulse on the thermometer? I guess we have to keep supporting international organizations like the United Nations to be able to make those decisions for us. But being able to pump up, you know, however thousands or millions of tons of small particles up into the upper atmosphere is probably is well within our technological capabilities right now. You know, they've created these elevators to space theoretically, and they're designing them. So yeah, I think that's where we're going to end up, or we're going to all end up dead. So that's where I have to put my thoughts on. But keep praying though. Trees grow greener when you pray.
That's interesting. Yes. Thanks. Ted, you're next, and then Dave.
Tough act to follow, Adam. I agree with virtually everything you've said. The trouble is we've been praying to the wrong gods, particularly, and I think David Corton will say the same thing about praying to money. It has not done us much good. And he's coming on a little longer after me. The big question is, are we smart enough to save ourselves? And I think what we learned in that it takes a perceived crisis down to the personal level to get people to take even a simple action as maybe having one less steak this week, that they've got to really feel it. And we've been finding this working around the world in coastal zones, trying to get people to, at least, as you pointed out, not build right on the beach. And their perception of saving themselves is very local. So I think I'm just asking, do you think we can actually find enough success stories to piece it together a bit at a time? Or do we have to do it all at once with a great crusade towards survivalism or something of that sort, which becomes a political movement?
I think the former, yeah, and I think we've. Sorry, I meant the latter. I think the latter. I think it's going to be this catastrophe. I think it's going to be a crisis. In my early days, I sat with the Assistant Deputy Minister of Environment Canada, the Atmospheric Environment Service. I was, like, you can believe it, I was teaching him how to use a computer. We just received computers for the first time. 1987, it would have been Howard Ferguson. And while I was teaching him, he got on the phone. He said, I have to take this. And he gets on the phone and he's screaming and screaming. He slams down. He said, God damn it. Those Americans, it's going to take a plume of poisonous gas to come over the Great Lakes and kill people in Toronto until they do something. That's what he said. And that's stuck with me, that, yeah, we don't tend, we tend to make all of these regulations after the big disaster happens. And unfortunately, we got to talk to psychologists about this, right? Because, I'm not one of those. So I don't know why humans are like that. I don't know why I'm like that, but we are.
Yeah, I'm a social scientist and I can't figure it out either, but we'll have to talk. Thank you very much.
Okay, next is Dave Pollock and then Bill Tyson.
Thanks, Peter. No, I don't think I had a question. It was just in the course of the flow of the conversation.
Okay.
I thought governments could indeed impose on companies to enforce stranded assets in the fossil fuel industry. It's just that there would be major negotiations around public compensation for that, but it's certainly not beyond the pale if we do move into a kind of Second World War emergency mode of thinking about what needs to be done.
Okay, thank you. Bill Tyson and then Ruben Nelson.
Hi. Adam, thanks very much for telling it like it is. So often people don't. I'm afraid climate change is just one aspect of a problem that is manifest in many other ways: pollution, cutting down forests, and so on. And in my view, the only way we're going to solve this is by decreasing the number of people. I think that anybody who says we need to have population growth should be put away in some safe place. I'm surprised you didn't mention the need to reduce the population, because that's going to happen some way or other. I hope we do it gradually rather than catastrophically. Over to you.
Yes, thank you. I agree with you. If we don't do it gradually through our own measures, then the natural systems will take care of it for us through some catastrophic event. Yeah, human population is a really tough one. When I suggest that, because students always want to know, what should I be doing? What are the things I should be doing? And so, we come up with a big list of things that, these are the first things and the big steps you can make. Whenever I mention reducing, have one child instead of, I have three, so I'm guilty as everyone else. But they, I do get a lot of pushback from certain individuals, certainly from certain religions, and but in the grand scale of things, the grand scheme, it is still shown that with better economics, that fewer children are born as a result. It happens in every single country. But you're right, we have a weird look at things. We look at it as a catastrophe when our own growth rates need to be supplemented by immigration, or we think of it as country is finished because of the demographics. The country of the 21st century was supposed to be India, because they had the youngest population between the ages of 2 and 22. And we're talking about how China was going to start having some issues, and they're starting to show their heads now. You get 100 population experts in a room and ask them where we're going to be in 60 years. You get 100 different answers, but I think you're right. It's not just the population though. It's also the lifestyle. Because us Canadians are hogs of resources, of water, of energy, of natural resources. We're like 6 different other people from China. So I think we have to start looking at our lifestyles.
Okay, next is Ruben and then Dave.
Thank you. Adam, I'm interested in your comment about paradigm change. As I understand you, you're saying clearly that our modern culture is on a path which only leads to disaster, and we don't show nearly enough signs of being serious about that, so that the most likely outcome is disaster. You talked about geoengineering as kind of a Hail Mary pass, to use a football analogy, which may or may not deal with things. In a complex living system, it may make things worse. Is a paradigm change kind of another Hail Mary pass, that there's nothing within our normal frame of reference that can deal with this? And if so, say more about that. What do you mean by it? How do you go about it? Do you know of any group anywhere in the world that is seriously pursuing a civilizational paradigm change even with the same kind of vigor and money that is now going into research geoengineering? I don't.
What great
Geoengineering
questions.
outfunds paradigm change, 100 to 1.
Yeah, even more so. Yeah, great question. The first was, I think you said, are we on this path to destruction? And I come to the viewpoint that we are, not just off the top of my head. There are, I've been thinking about these things for 35 years, and I was teaching a course on societies and sustainability, and I was looking at various aspects of what maintains a society and how things might change over time, and looking at the natural resources and the water and climate change and biodiversity, and and so much in like the Club of Rome should be doing. I was looking at all of those, and it was, what surprised me was the separate scientific literature in all of these different disciplines was pointing to the year 2050 as a point of where everything goes to hell in a handcart. And I ask all of you to keep that in mind, the year 2050, because you'll find that there's scientific studies that come out again and again and again, and they'll always be around that time frame. Scientists say, the last one I saw was scientists say that all the oxygen in the global oceans will disappear by the year 2048 if we keep going the way we're going. So that's why I think it's not that it's history, it's wisdom, and it's looking at the scientific literature that says this is the path that we're on. The paradigm shift is a tougher one. The best that I've been able to come up with is something called two-eyed seeing, and I don't know if you've heard about it. And it is it comes from Albert Johnson, who's a Mi'kmaq elder in New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia, and he says that really our Western science is necessary, but we need to be using the wisdom of the First Nations at the same time, so that with these two eyes we can actually see properly on where the future holds. Have I studied it enough? Has anybody put it in place that I can point to say success? I have to say no. But I'm taking it as part of the fundamental curriculum of what we're teaching in the new School of Climate Change and Adaptation at the University of Prince Edward Island. So we're engaging. We have a full-time Indigenous faculty member from the local community, and we're going to engage the students. We're going to engage the elders and trying to teach alongside us, so that we don't lose touch with that form of wisdom. And so that's the best I can give you right now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next is Dave, and then after that, John Meyer.
Hi. So thank you for the talk. Nice information, and actually I thought relatively quite up to date. Maybe not for the 4 or 5 different heat waves that are currently happening. Yeah, but this is going to link directly to what you just said. Is 2050, as much as it is in the literature, really the important date now, or is it a much earlier date, perhaps 2030?
Wow, you did promise some good questions, Peter, and you guys are delivering. You're not you're doing Peter proud here. That's a great question, because you're absolutely right. Yeah, 2050, if that's when things are going to hell in a handcart, we got to start moving now. And I think 2028, 2030. So by the end of this decade is where we need fundamental change. Okay, we're not talking marginal change. We're not talking of adjusting things. We're talking significant commitments to be doing things. So that even seems too far for me. Like, we should be doing it tomorrow, darn it. But yeah, 2030 is probably the good point where, you know, this is it. But maybe, you know, maybe that's where we start seeing some of the catastrophes. Maybe we'll call them minor catastrophes that are occurring. So that it will add as an impetus for change. You know, Hurricane Sandy did so much for climate change in the United States. And that was a strong storm. I remember back in the year 2000, it was a national adaptation conference, and people were up from New York City saying that it was possible that the Manhattan subway system could flood. And we were thinking, that is science fiction. And lo and behold, you know, within 15 years, it actually happened. So, you know, those are the sorts of things that, you know, maybe if we can survive these smaller pushes that will push politicians and the public towards action, are really what's required. Let's pray. Let's pray that they happen soon enough in a good succession, that they hit all of the world so that everybody gets on board, because that's what's needed. Everybody's got to jump on board.
Okay, thank you. We've got a lot of questions still, and we're going to extend it by 10 minutes. But could I move to John Meyer and then Susan?
Okay, Adam, super. Thanks very much for this. Question is, how much, as the landscape changes under climate change, what is that going to look like? So my question is, in the last warming period, say around 1000, when the Vikings began to move around very easily, in the North Atlantic, Greenland, and that sort of thing.
You may not show. The camera doesn't seem to be big.
The Anasazi were perished in the American Southwest. So right now, about 2/3 of the latitude in North America we can grow food on. As warming takes place, maybe we gain something on the top in the far north in terms of agriculture, but do we lose large areas to desertification in the rest of the continent?
Well, if I didn't say something controversial for you, then I'm enough so far. I'll probably say it now. You know, when people say, you know, is climate change really that bad for PEI or for Canada? You know, I used to say that, well, you know, in the short term, I have to say in the short term now, because in the long term we're all doomed. But in the short term, you know, PEI is probably going to have more positive benefits than it will negative aspects to climate change, right? From our changing environment, and in some ways that'll happen in Canada too. And we also have such great resources. Like, we do live in the best country in the world, you know that. That we can react, we can adapt to things. So anything that's thrown to Canada I have faith that we can survive and push through. It's where people are living in marginal areas right now. If we, we're living through this heat wave that we've in the West Coast that we're talking about. I've done studies in places like Alexandria, Egypt, where they went from 2 weeks per year of heat wave to 6 weeks per year heat wave within 20-year time frame. Like there's these fundamental, strange, anomalous, weird things going on, extreme things going on that scare me as a climatologist. And I don't hear many other climatologists talking about it. And I put it to that they're scared too, and they don't really know what to say. Because a lot of things that we've been thinking about and talking about have come true and have been worse. And with my study of history, when I was at working for Harvard University, I looked at the history and gone through the science, is that was one thing that you could always depend on, is that scientists are just so small c conservative that they don't want to say the crazy things that are going on. And so that all of the impacts not only came true, but they were a lot worse than what was anticipated. So if you think what I'm saying is a little crazy, I'm going to tell you right now that things are going to be worse than what I'm saying, because I've got to live with my scientific reputation. And the stuff that we're seeing out there is nuts. So I haven't directed your question. I haven't addressed your question directly, but I'm just trying to say to you that we're going to experience these crazy, crazy things that are going on, like that are going to impact on our food security. Being here in Canada, we're fortunate that we're going to be affected, but we're going to do like I just read today. What was it? The University of Oxford said that Canada is a leading country, the highest number of first vaccinations. Like that's incredible. Like that's really great things that we can accomplish, and I think we can accomplish to protect ourselves. The real issue is going to be, how are we going to save the rest of the world? Places are disappearing. Places, like the Maldives, or they've abandoned islands because they've had to.
I guess my question is, and I'll cut it off after this, but I guess my question was, if we are able to grow broccoli at York Factory, will Kansas be marginalized? And that's basically the question. We gain a little, but lose a huge amount in the core.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Susan, and then Barry Bruce.
Adam, thank you so much for that. It was excellent. And I'm particularly interested in the paradigm shift that you're talking about. And I hope you're assigning braiding sweetgrass as one of your books for them to read. And I particularly loved Ted's comment about praying to the wrong God, or else they at least are very bad at spelling. GOLD is one letter too many. We are discussing things at the First Unitarian Congregation about Indigenous food security and topics like thanking the plants, having the respect for the environment, the interconnected web of life, and that sort of level of paradigm, even among a congregation that is interested in it, seems to be very hard for them to take on. And I'm just wondering if you have something that you have to say about that paradigm shift and how the students are reacting to it.
Students are embracing very well. And that's really where I get all of my hope from, because it can be pretty discouraging at times. But the students are, they're looking to do the right thing. They haven't started their genuflection to the GOLD yet. So they don't have to get caught up in that nonsense. So they're doing quite well, and it's so respectful to the elders and to any of the Indigenous speakers that we bring in and that we work with. It's really difficult because, you know, the First Nations, of course, you know, they're dealing with so much.
Yeah.
We've, you know, I can talk about PEI specifically. You know, the Europeans essentially came and pushed them to the worst parts of the island, and that's the place that's, you know, disappearing. You know, they're losing hectares of land per year. So they're having to deal with, let alone what we're hearing about in the media constantly, but they're dealing with real physical changes to their homeland, or what's left of their, you know, their reserves right now here on PEI, just due to climate change. So the communities are very supportive. The First Nations community is very supportive of the work we're doing and what we're trying to accomplish. But at the same time, they're really fighting to try just for survival. Like they're buying land on mainland PEI to just in case their place disappears.
Wow.
Under that 2-meter rise that we talked about, they lose over 50% of their homeland and of their island, Lennox Island. They lose their link to the mainland too. So it's you know, there's some big changes are coming, and hopefully we can just learn. And I see the First Nations as being part of our chance at survival, and let's hope we can engage them well enough and that they are willing to help us.
Okay, next is Bruce, and then I'm afraid the last question will go to Roy Culpepper. We have still a lot of people on the list, but I think Art, it's probably time to wrap it up. We've lost Bill Reese. He had to leave. He had a whole bunch of questions. Sorry about that. Anyhow, Barry.
Yeah, carbon can be fixed in the soil. So that's a way of removing it from the atmosphere. I'm involved in started a couple of projects that would tend to do that. And it uses, well, a mixture of Western and First Nations and Ruth Stout technology. So I'm wondering what you think of the potential for that as an agricultural transformation.
It's certainly needed. You know, the carbon content of the soils here on PEI and across Canada have been, you know, sinking for so long. So any means, I mean, you're really solving many challenges just by investing in this and then implementing any programs. From the numbers that I've seen are wonderful. You know, like you said, that like it might be able to solve the big problem, just being able to sequester that much carbon into soils that we can then put to good use for, you know, growing food for us. So if there's a place that I would start, because I haven't said that yet, I would say your work is, or what you're a part of is the place to start, because it hits so many you know, fundamentals of what we're looking for, and the potential is huge. From what I've seen, the research, it's huge for being able to sequester huge amounts of carbon in a form that we really want to use. You know, when it goes into the ocean, it's warming the oceans, making them more acidic. We don't want that. If it's getting more carbon into the soil, that just enriches the soils that we can grow more nutritious food, which is fantastic.
Thank you.
Could we just fit in Roy for one quick question?
Yeah,
Sure.
Roy, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Adam, for a fantastic, if somewhat sobering presentation. My comment and question won't be unfamiliar to you because we've been talking about adaptation. But before I make my pitch on adaptation, I just wanted to respond to the request for a paradigm shift. And some of us in the group of 78 have been talking about Kate Rayworth's work, and she wrote a book called Donut Economics, How to Think Like a 21st Century Economist. It came out a couple of years ago, and she has this brilliant model of integrating the social, the economic, and the environmental to make them all harmonious. It's a fantastic and path-breaking work. I strongly recommend it to everyone. Anyway, on adaptation, it seems to me that we owe it to ourselves to protect our communities and our societies from the damage that is bound to come. Question is how to do it, and how to do it within the resources that we have. Of course, building seawalls is probably not the way to go, but the alternative, as was suggested earlier, is relocating people away from the areas of damage. Similarly, we can invest in nature-based solutions to sequester and protect natural areas. Similarly, we can help the developing countries who are getting the worst of climate catastrophe, having the least to be responsible for. I think we owe them the support in resources so that they can protect mangroves and protect themselves from flooding and other forms of extreme weather. Anyway, that was my comment, and you can make it a question if you will.
Good comment. Thank you.
Okay, Art.
Okay, we'll be closing this off now. Jean, could you thank our speaker? Share your screen.
With pleasure. And do you have my screen up?
No, it's failed.
Okay, I'll go back. Let's see what we can do here.
Why don't you just go ahead? We're recording.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you, Adam, for an absolutely fascinating and interesting but very provocative talk. What you've said really does pack a punch, and all I can say is I hope that humanity can get back up from that punch and move forward. Otherwise, we really are screwed. So thank you for that. And for everyone, I just want to say that for anybody who is not a member of KCOR, we would be delighted to have you come and join the organization if you can. KCOR does have a website at canadiancore.com, and please feel free to look at anything that we have there and apply for a membership. It's relatively inexpensive, and it is a registered charity, so it is a tax donation as you're going. And if you would like to, this particular talk and most of the other talks that we have had on our Zoom session are available on our YouTube channel. And we would ask that you could subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you get notification of things that are happening there for you. So with that, I would like to say thank you very much for what you have given to us today. It's been very, very thought-provoking.